This is CBN NewsWatch.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm George Thomas. We begin with an explosive investigation by two Texas newspapers entitled Abuse of Faith. The Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News report that in the last 10 years, since 2008, more than 250 people who worked or volunteered in Southern Baptist churches have been charged with sex crimes. Our Mark Martin is in the CBN newsroom with more. Mark, what's the latest?
George, the article also states that over 20 years, sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Church left more than 700 victims. The article starts out by sharing the story of a woman who says when she was 14, her pastor in Sanger, a small town an hour north of Dallas, first molested her. Debbie Vasquez says it was the first of many assaults. The newspapers go on to say that she became pregnant after one of the assaults when she was 18. In June of 2008, the article states that Vasquez went to Indianapolis, where she and others requested that Southern Baptist Convention leaders and the organization's 47,000 churches track sexual predators and take action against congregations that harbored or concealed abusers. According to the article, Vasquez wanted them to look into prevention policies implemented by other faiths, including the Catholic Church. The newspaper's investigation shows that 10 years ago, the denomination rejected nearly every proposed reform. CBN News spoke with one of the authors of the article, Chronicle reporter John Tedesco.
Creation of a database does raise some interesting issues about, who would actually keep track of these cases, who would be included. It's a pretty sticky, complicated issue. But, on the flip side, there is a problem where Baptist churches are hiring guys who really should not be working at churches.
The newspapers report that alleged sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Church is not just a recent problem. Their investigation shows that since 1998, around 380 leaders and volunteers with the denomination have faced allegations of sexual misconduct. The article goes on to say that that number is made up of those who were convicted, credibly accused, and successfully sued, and those who confessed or resigned. And George, it also states that more of them worked in Texas than in any other state. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. The Southern Baptist denomination, by the way, started a sexual abuse study group last year to address this very issue. And leaders today, as you can imagine, were swift to respond to the Chronicle investigation with expressions of sorrow, repentance, and calls to action. SBC President J.D. Greer said that leaders should have listened to early warnings about abuse and promised to use all the spiritual and financial resources of the denomination to stop predators. He also called for care for survivors, saying, quote, "The safety of the victims matters more than the reputation of Southern Baptists." Russell Moore, the denomination's public policy spokesperson, called for disciplining churches that cover up abuse by deeming them out of fellowship with other churches. Survivor advocate Ashley Easter has spoken out for years against abuse in different denominations and churches. She expects more survivors to come forward in the aftermath of the report.
I think they only scratched the tip of the iceberg. I think this is just the beginning of an amazingly larger number of survivors that are going to be coming forward in the next couple of weeks.
Boz Javidian is the founder of Grace, which advises churches and faith-based groups on the issue of sexual abuse. He joins us now with more on the Houston Chronicle investigation. Boz, thank you so much for coming on. First of all, your reaction to the scope of what the Chronicle found.
I think any normal reaction would be one of grief, great sadness, and some anger that it takes a newspaper article to delve into this for so many within a particular denomination to begin to realize this is a systemic issue within the church.
Southern Baptist leaders, as I mentioned earlier, including Russell Moore and J.D. Greer, have apologized, calling it a crisis and saying it's way past time for immediate compliance with reporting to civil authorities, no cover-ups and compassionate care for victims. Are you satisfied thus far, 24 hours after this report, from what you're hearing from Southern Baptist leaders?
Well, I mean, it's not whether I'm satisfied. It's whether the throngs of victims who've been abused for decades are satisfied and see some degree of hope in the future of that church. I think that I would expect nothing less from the leaders to have a response like they've responded thus far. I mean, what other response could you possibly make? So I think that's a step in the right direction. But I also think that the leaders and church pastors and even church members need to all take a step back and ask themselves, what have they said or done that may have directly or indirectly contributed to fostering such an environment where systemic abuse and cover-up is the norm? And to be humble, to be teachable, and to say we need to not only grieve, but we need to ask ourselves where we have failed and then start taking action. This is going to be a long road for them if they're going to implement a complete cultural transformation as it relates to the protecting of the vulnerable people within their congregations.
Boz, as you know from this investigation, sex abuse survivors, in fact, had called for a registry of offenders years ago. Why didn't it happen? Why weren't these leaders listening, paying attention to this cancer that was taking place, unfolding in the denomination?
I think there's a variety of probably factors that contributed to that. My own opinion is that probably they've been listening too much to lawyers and not enough to what God would have them want to do. I think the concern is if we put together a database, it's going to tie in the denomination into all these individual churches. So when an individual church gets sued, now the denomination is going to get sued. So we have to keep that barrier. And once you develop a database, that barrier dissipates. I say it doesn't matter. Let's create the database, because what's more important? Protecting the lives of children and vulnerable people in the throngs of churches around the country, or protecting the institution. And I think we all know what Jesus would have us do, and I think it's time to delve into that into that arena and begin thinking and talking through and implementing a database. Yes, it's going to be tricky, and yes, you got to put your thinking hats on and really wrestle with what that database is going to look like. But it's time to start moving in that direction, and there are plenty of very intelligent people within the SBC who can figure that out, but they just need to start doing it.
Yeah, as Mr. Greer said, quote, the safety of the victims matters more than the reputation of Southern Baptist. Mr. Javedian, as always, sir, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Moving on to some political news in the country. President Trump is heading to El Paso, Texas to round up support for his border wall. Some officials in the city already on the defense after Trump claimed last week in his State of the Union that El Paso had one of the highest violent crime rates in the country until a barrier was built. Democrat Representative Veronica Escobar says that information is wrong.
At the President's State of the Union address, he claimed that my community, El Paso, Texas, quote, used to have extremely high rates of violent crime, one of the highest in the entire country, end quote. And he claimed that we became one of the safest communities in America because of a wall. Data from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program shows that El Paso has historically been one of the safest communities in the nation, and that we were such long before a wall was constructed.
Trump's visit to the border wall, by the way, follows stalled negotiations this past weekend over the number of beds that can be used by detained illegal immigrants. And tonight on CBN's Faith Nation, we'll have a look at the president's trip to El Paso and on the battle over a border wall with the latest from the White House and Capitol Hill. That's on Faith Nation, only on the CBN News channel. A Virginia lawmaker has backed off a plan to introduce an impeachment bill to remove Democratic Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax from office after allegations of sexual assault came to light last week. Fairfax denies the accusation. Democratic delegate Patrick Hope tweeted a statement this morning saying that he stands behind the victims and still calls for the resignation of Fairfax, but says additional conversations need to take place before anything is filed. He tweeted, quote, The purpose of this additional time is so that we can find the best process to investigate these crimes with the broadest possible support. The impeachment process is about investigating to find the truth. This as the governor and state attorney general are embroiled in their own scandals. Both have acknowledged wearing blackface in the 1980s. Several state and national Democratic leaders are calling for Governor Ralph Northam to resign. Northam says he won't step down.
Virginia needs someone that can heal. There's no better person to do that than a doctor. Virginia also needs someone who is strong, who has empathy, who has courage, and who has a moral compass. And that's why I'm not going anywhere. I have learned from this. I have a lot more to learn.
If the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney all leave office or were removed, the Speaker of the House would become governor. He's a Republican, which is giving the Democratic office holders another reason to try to keep their positions. New Jersey is now the second state in the nation to require schools to teach about LGBTQ history. Under the new law, public school teachers must include lessons about the political, social, and economic contributions of gay and transgender people. New Jersey Governor Democrat Phil Murphy says he was honored to sign the legislation into law. He tweeted, LGBTQ plus history is part of our shared story, and students deserve to know it. Proud to sign a bill that makes New Jersey the second state in the nation to require an LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum in our schools. California was the first state to pass such a law. Overseas, the Pentagon's top official made an unannounced visit to Afghanistan today to meet with U.S. commanders and Afghan leaders amid a push for peace with the Taliban. U.S. officials say they have no orders to pull troops from the country, but Afghan officials say that it is part of the Taliban's top list of demands in exchange for a possible peace agreement. The Trump administration is looking at all possibilities for ending the 17-year war, the longest in American history.
My overall goal is, at the direction of the President and the Secretary of State, not to seek a withdrawal agreement, but a peace agreement. Because a peace agreement can allow withdrawal, but it is not just a withdrawal agreement that we are seeking. To achieve a peace agreement, quite a number of issues have to be dealt with.
Officials say they hope a final deal is made before Afghanistan's presidential election in July. 40 years ago today, a radical Iranian cleric led the overthrow of his country's government and installed an Islamist regime. It still stands as the world's leading sponsor of terror. As CBN's John Wagi explains, Israel stands on the front line to prevent Iran from expanding westward and destroying the Jewish state.
In 1979, the world was introduced to the menacing glare of the Ayatollah Khomeini. His Iranian revolution ousted the Shah of Iran, a U.S. ally, and put its mark on American history with a hostage crisis that lasted more than a year. Its leaders began to purge the country of Western influence and set Iran on a path of expansion and Islamist terror. During the revolution, the U.S. was dubbed the Great Satan by the ruling mullahs. Still, most of their hatred was reserved for the country they called the Little Satan, Israel. For 4 decades, they have vowed to wipe it off the map. The show of force continued this month as Iran paraded its missiles in Tehran.
I think a clash is inevitable.
Middle East expert Michael Widlansky says according to Israeli military sources, Iran has armed Hezbollah in Lebanon with enough missiles to bombard all of Israel for weeks.
Lebanon itself is so well armed with Hezbollah missiles and rockets that Israel could face every day not 10 rockets, not 100 rockets, but 2,500 rocket attacks every day over a period of 3 weeks.
And that doesn't take into account Iran's nuclear program. In last year's UN address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu exposed a secret nuclear site with 300 tons of nuclear material.
Now, I also have a message today for the tyrants of Tehran. Israel knows what you're doing, and Israel knows where you're doing it. Israel will never let a regime that calls for our destruction to develop nuclear weapons. Not now, not in 10 years, not ever.
While Widlansky warns Israel can take care of itself, he worries if the mullahs aren't stopped, their grand design could swallow up the region.
The Iranians want Shia Islam to be the face of Islam. That means they want to go after Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait. They want to go after all their neighbors and project their force all the way to the Mediterranean and to the Atlantic. They want to go through Lebanon and then through North Africa. They want to go through Yemen. They have a real expansionist process, which is similar to what the communists and the Nazis had. This is not just a religious calling. This is very serious power politics strategy playing.
John Waggy, CBN News, Jerusalem.
CBN presents The I Wills of God, your path to overcoming fear and anxiety.
We're going to talk about some of the incredible promises God has made to His children.
In Pat Robertson's newest teaching, you'll discover the I wills of God. I will rescue him, protect him, answer him, be with him in trouble, deliver him, honor him, satisfy him with long life, show him my salvation, and see amazing stories of God's promises in action.
What I felt was loved and treasured.
God spared my life twice in 3 days.
The good Lord had given me a second chance.
Break free from stress and despair.
The Lord doesn't want you to live in fear, but to know the rewards given to those who love God.
Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit cbn.com. The I Wills of God, your path to overcoming fear and anxiety.
Hello, I'm Terry Newsom. Did you know there are more than 148 million orphans in the world today? 148 million. But it was 3 little girls that taught me about the plight of orphans. My husband and I spent nearly a month immersed in the daily activities of a Ukrainian orphanage as we waited to adopt 3 sisters. I saw firsthand the utter loneliness, the pain of rejection, and the overwhelming desire to be loved. That experience changed me forever. And out of it grew a ministry from my heart called Orphans Promise. Today, we're helping orphans and vulnerable children in more than 50 countries worldwide. Thousands of children are now in safe homes. They're being educated, and they're learning life skills. I'm asking you to join with me and become family to these children. Will you call the number on your screen right now? Because every child deserves a chance to be happy.
Welcome back to the CBN News channel. The ISIS caliphate in Syria is coming to an end. But as CBN News contributor Chuck Holton reports from the war-weary southern Syria, the Islamic terror group isn't giving up easily. They're using women and children as human shields.
So I'm now within sight of ISIS' last stand in the area of Hajin, right back behind me. Just off to my right is a place called Baghous, where they say the last ISIS fighters are holed up. We've been hearing airstrikes throughout the evening, last night, into the early morning hours. It sounds like the military has really stepped up its efforts to eradicate the last of these guys. But what that's causing is more people to flee, and many of them are injured. And so here at this collection point, those who can make it here have been walking to this point where they're processed by the Syrian Defense Forces, and they're then moved to further side inland. This 19-year-old woman is a French citizen who came with her mother to join ISIS when she was only 15.
I came in 2015 with my mother and my sister to live in the Khilafah. And after this I want to escape, but they ask a lot of money, and my family in French, they scared to send the money. There is no food, no nothing. No food, no. We was living in the tent. No electricity, never electricity, nothing. I want to go back to my country.
Buses come every afternoon to take these women and children to a camp several hours away. Any men who surrender are assumed to be ISIS fighters and are taken to a detention facility. Families who arrive too late are forced to spend the night here in the desert. The light is almost gone out here, and we're still hearing fighting going on a couple kilometers away. But the more pressing emergency right now is that there are maybe a couple hundred people out here behind me in this just desert. They got dumped off here after escaping from ISIS, but they're going to have to spend the night out here. Last night it was about 30 degrees, and people could die out here. I'm just watching them as they try to prepare for what they know is coming. It's already below 40, I would say. Clear sky. It's going to be extremely cold here tonight. And there are these holes that were dug in the earth to be used as slit trenches, as bathrooms. And what they're doing is going in and cleaning out all the excrement and throwing it out. And they're going to sleep in there tonight because it's at least out of the wind. Many of these people are injured as well. It's just hard to imagine. We've given away all the blankets we had. I gave away my warm socks. We're trying to figure out a way to help these people as much as we can, but you know, it's just a drop in the ocean. And so I'm just not sure what else we can do except pray. From the Euphrates River Valley in southern Syria, I'm Chuck Holt for CBN News.
Parents, the Superbook Bible app is a great way to get your child reading the Bible because in today's busy world, we can use some help. The free Superbook Bible app has fun stuff your kids will love. They'll have a blast learning the Bible, playing great games, watching cool videos, discovering heroes in the Bible. They'll have fun while they learn God's Word. The Superbook Kids Bible app, available now.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Discover the I wills of God. I will rescue him, protect him, answer him, be with him in trouble, deliver him, honor him, satisfy him with long life, show him my salvation.
What I felt was loved and treasured.
God spared my life twice in 3 days.
The good Lord had given me a second chance.
Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit CBN.com. The I wills of God, the latest teaching from Pat Robertson.
Welcome back. It's National Marriage Week. Experts say we need a time to celebrate marriage because it's in trouble. And as Paul Strand reports, that's disturbing because the biblical institution has so many benefits for your health and life.
Is marriage a dying institution in America? Back in 1970, 78% of adults were married. That's more than 3 out of 4. Then began the spiral downward. Now it's just 48%. Less than half. And that comes at a cost.
The number of never married Americans has grown almost 5-fold since 1970.
From his Maryland home, Michael McManus heads up Marriage Savers.
The number of people getting married has dropped like a rock.
He says that's too bad because staying single could be seen as harmful to your health.
Married couples will live 2 to 10 years longer than those who are single. That's a big difference.
The American Stroke Association shows that married men are 2/3 less likely to have a stroke than their single counterparts. Married cancer patients can see a more positive recovery from cancer surgery.
Their 2/3 less likely to have a heart attack following that cancer operation. Married couples are less likely to develop mental problems like depression.
They even sleep better. Wives up their chances of getting a good night's sleep by 10%.
Married couples are less likely to engage in risky behavior like driving fast or drinking to excess.
That could be because they feel a responsibility to stay alive and well for their spouse and children. McManus says you can help keep your partnership alive by doing things like finding an older couple who can mentor you. Back in the 90s, his church did just that with almost 300 couples.
90% are still together today. My wife and I have mentored 61 couples over time, and we only know of one divorce among them.
We've long known that marriage has benefits for society and certainly for children, but now you know it has benefits for you. Much better for your health, and you'll live longer too. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Potomac, Maryland.
When you give, smiles grow bigger. When you care, homes are happier. When you comfort, the hurt goes away. When we all come together to love, miracles happen.
Hello, I'm Terry Newsom. Did you know there are more than 148 million orphans in the world today? 148 million. But it was 3 little girls that taught me about the plight of orphans. My husband and I spent nearly a month immersed in the daily activities of a Ukrainian orphanage as we waited to adopt 3 sisters. I saw firsthand the utter loneliness, the pain of rejection, and the overwhelming desire to be loved. That experience changed me forever. And out of it grew a ministry from my heart called Orphans Promise. Today, we're helping orphans and vulnerable children in more than 50 countries worldwide. Thousands of children are now in safe homes. They're being educated, and they're learning life skills. I'm asking you to join with me and become family to these children. Will you call the number on your screen right now? Because every child deserves a chance to be happy.
Hello? Is this thing on? Hey, kids, do you love games? And do you love discovering things? Well, do ya?
Then you're gonna love this. It's the new free Superbook Kids Bible app. You can play games, watch videos, find answers to your questions, and a whole lot more. The new Superbook Kids Bible app. Free downloads available on iTunes and Google Play now.
Billy Graham's grandson is asking that people pray for his aunt, Anne Graham Lotz. She's completing a final round of chemotherapy for breast cancer treatment this week. Although she says God has healed her, her nephew, Will Graham, says she's weak and exhausted.
She wants to preach. She's a preacher. She wants to get out and preach and preach and preach, and she's just worn out right now. And so just pray that as God heals her body, that she'll get her strength back and get back on the road and tell more people about Christ.
Graham has just arrived in Manila for a 3-night festival, and we will continue to watch that particular story. Well, folks, you can find more of our exclusive coverage on the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. That is it for all of us here. Goodbye.